welcome back to Spar and Brawl. I hope you're having a decent day. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Sam, and we're back with episode 3 of our Frankfurt School series. So in case if this is the first episode from this series, that you're watching, we're pretty much making a series on the Frankfurt School right now, going through the generations all the way from beginning to the end. The first 2 episodes were on just an overview of the Frankfurt School and the different thinkers and situation and context that influenced them. So I highly recommend to go check those out if you haven't yet. This episode make much more sense. And also these episodes, we're really blessed to have been able to do this, but we've interviewed a bunch of professors. So different ones are going to feature in this video and different ones that featured in the other videos. But everything that you hear from them, they're kind of guided by our questions. So I would really suggest that you go watch their full interviews. So links to their full interviews are also in the description box, but also bear in mind that we didn't ask the same questions to all of them. So don't get mad at them if you think they didn't address some important issues. The blame should be really laid more on us. So with that out of the way, please like and subscribe. And we also have timestamps down below. So first, we're going to kind of introduce very quickly Herbert Marcuse, give our 2 cents. I'm going to just give a short biographical explanation, overview of Marcuse, and then talk about his 2 biggest books, Eros Civilization and One Dimensional Man. Sam is also going to discuss a few points, and then we're going to move on to the interviews. Is there anything you think I forgot to mention here, Sam, that would be important and useful in the intro?
The only thing is, first hopefully we give a tiny overview, and then we're gonna sort of give a tiny personal takes at the end based on the things we mentioned in the intro. So we based on the criticism that the school has faced, we're gonna discuss some of that, maybe read some specific quotes from them. But I like to, full disclosure, for this series, I managed to read some of the text only once, and I still haven't managed to read a lot of literature written by them or about them. So take that into account and don't be too angry at us.
100%. We barely scratched the surface with some of it, because since we're trying to, even though we're making almost 10 episodes, but since we're trying to look at the Frankfurt School over every single generation and all these different thinkers, we can't really dive too deeply into some of them. You can find like for Marcuse's book, like One Dimensional Man or Eros and Civilization, people make 4-part series on just one book. And, if you really want to dive deeply, you have to do it that way. But we're kind of going down this route. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
The purpose of the show is to provide basic knowledge. So if in a party, somebody brings up Frankfurt School, you can talk about it without seeming stupid, but not really necessarily doing the reading. So it's really the purpose of the show is really to provide party tricks for people who attend parties where people talk about Frankfurt School.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like one hell of a party. Where can I find these kind of parties? No, man, I would. If that was the case, I would go to parties much more often and willingly. Show up with a half-assed theory on Frankfurt School or Herbert Marcuse or something, and just take it from there.
I have a feeling we are in minority if we feel that.
You never know. There are many others like us. We're just scared, we're all hiding when one day it'll be our turn. But
every time Marcuse mentions alienation, take a jello shot. I swear to God, you can do that game. You can do that game.
Oh, 100%. I don't know if you should do that game, because you're gonna end up
die. You're gonna get alcoholic poisoning. You mean alienation every 3 sentences.
But yeah, and yeah. So links to our interviews, the full interviews that I said are in the description box. And we tried to ask our guests some descriptive questions, but also some critical questions as well as we could. So it's kind of like a 2-dimensional depiction of Herbert Marcuse, if I understood the 2-dimensional concept properly, which we are going to get into as well. But okay, Sam, I would say that Marcuse is the most famous philosopher associated with the Frankfurt School, especially in the US, although I know that Adorno has also made a big comeback, but I would say Marcuse is the biggest. He was born in 1898 and passed away in 1979. Interestingly, he wrote his habilitation, which I believe in German universities happens after your PhD. So then you have to do another kind of piece of work and thesis. And he did this with Martin Heidegger, who also influenced him quite a bit during his early days. But then Martin Heidegger became associated big time with the Nazi party. So as you can imagine, that kind of spelled the end of that relationship.
He was a card-carrying member and was the head of a university during the Nazi rule. Although there is some evidence that he tried to minimize the effects the laws had on Jewish university people, but there is also evidence that he may have not done as much as he should have. It's kind of a mixed thing. It's a very weird. It has tainted all his writings, really, in a way.
Yeah, no, certainly. And then in 1932, Marcuse left for the United States, and he never came back. And because I'm saying that because Adorno and Horkheimer, who also left to the US, they came back. I feel like he acclimated the best to the United States, and he worked in a lot of different schools. Some people use that as a kind of jab to be like, well, you see, he wasn't given tenure here or there, but I don't think that had to do with his academic work, more probably with his way of thinking and ideology, I would imagine, because he while he was alive, he was famous. Like Marcuse didn't pass away and then become famous. He already was. So I mean, I can't see any other reason besides that him not having a tenure at a school.
He became famous when he was old, though, and I do think in one case, actually, if I'm not mistaken, sorry, my phone just called. It was he was in a Californian university. He was supposed to become get a position there, but I think then Ronald Reagan was the governor, and if I'm not mistaken, I remember reading that he may have intervened, or it became a hot topic because it was at the height of his fame.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So exactly, political reasons, and I mean, his two biggest books came out a good 15 and 25 years before he passed away. So you're right. I mean, I think there was space there while he was alive and also impactful. And I mean, just look at this. So I found out, and this is just the minimum, he has 4 doctoral students who have a wiki page. So, I don't know if that means a lot, but to me, it kind of seems like he had some successful people who he oversaw. And of course, the biggest one is possibly Angela Davis.
Yeah, Angela Davis is pretty famous. Yeah, and it's quite fun. I found it interesting that his wife, which we discussed in an interview with Christian Parenti, she did her PhD or thesis, whatever, under
Habermas.
Or Habermas. Sorry,
Habermas,
under Habermas.
Yeah.
Sorry, Habermas, not under Marcuse.
Yeah, I mean, conflict of interest. I don't know how you, but yeah, that makes. I mean, you already have access to Marcuse's brain. Might as well go talk to someone else.
That's a good point. That's you free. That's why everybody should date academics or people who are semi-academics and read some bullshit.
Sam is available, by the way, if anybody's interested. but Sam, before moving on to his 2 books and also your points, I just wanted to stress that context, I feel, is more important for these Frankfurt School thinkers than others. I mean, everybody thinks they're born in a special time or something, but Marcuse's really was, to an extent, relatively special. I don't want to get into it too much because that's all we talk about in the first 2 episodes. But he saw 2 things. One, the rise of Nazism, which, there have been authoritarian governments all around the world. But the Nazis, I think everybody kind of agrees they had I don't want to say specialness, but they had, they were a bit unique, perhaps in a
They
sense.
really, they really, they really did a fantastic job at being evil. Like,
yeah, I don't know what
they
words to
started the
use,
whole
but
industry. Like, there's a whole media industry, book industry. Channel 4 in the UK is basically BBC 4 is running on World War II documentaries.
yeah.
Like, well done there.
Yeah. So, and of course, he was a Jewish academic. So you can just imagine how it affected. I mean, affected to the extent that he had to pack his bags and leaves, of course, if he didn't want to get killed. And then secondly, he also witnessed like the golden years or the golden period of, the working class / middle class in the United States, that post World War II period that everybody talks about, where working family or middle class family could just have one job and that was enough to sustain a family. So so he experienced those two times, which I think are quite important for understanding his writings and where he comes from to an extent. I mean, everybody's impacted by their environment and everybody's a product of their environment, of course, but special circumstances and situations that he experienced and underwent.
I would say that, I mean, it's not just enough to say that he experienced World War II. He was very young. He's older than Adorno and Horkheimer, and he was involved, I think, even in the student revolutionary movements of Germany in early 19th. So he experienced because Germany, I mean, I think a lot of viewers know, was viewed as the height of, like, I think Marx thought that revolution is going to happen in Germany because it had the most working class that was educated and was in one place and was ready to have according to Marx, was ready to have a revolution. So he had experienced already a society that was like at the height of, let's say, progressiveness of its own time, obviously, and all that. That degenerate into a fascistic, the most reactionary of all regimes. And then in the United States, he didn't live long enough to post 70s, but up to the point that he was alive, he was seeing again a golden age of, consensus between the working class and the ruling class and all that.
Very good point. So he had also seen that, and I guess it just made me realize that you said that he was young. Yes, he was young, but I guess old enough to also see the transition into Nazism and fascism. So
more so than Adorno, Horkheimer, and certainly Habermas. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Okay, should we move on to these interviews?
Yeah.
So again, folks, please remember the interviews were guided by questions. There's so much to talk about here that all of them couldn't cover it, of course. And even more importantly, the full interviews, all the links are down below. So please check those out.
Marcuse is interesting under many respects, and I can here only mention some of these aspects. And certainly the connection between psychoanalysis and society, that was another line of research that was part of the Frankfurt School since the beginning. And that's something you see also in Eros and Civilization, where societal control and domination amounted basically to the control of the human basic instincts and sexual impulses, and so that liberation of society and therefore emancipation had to include sexual liberation. So that's why Marcuse became also a hero of the student movement in the 60s. But so his revisitation of Freud's theory, I think it's interesting and noteworthy. But then there are also many other aspects that Marcuse developed in terms of critique of capitalist ideology. And much before Eros and Civilization, probably the first important monograph that he wrote in 1941 was Reason and Revolution, And then the subtitle is Hegel and the Rise of Social Theory, just to connect this to the reflection on Hegel's philosophy, in addition to Marx, as we said. Then Kant came much later, more with Jürgen Habermas. I don't want to say things on this book if you have other people, but another book that is worth mentioning is One-Dimensional Men. And that's the book which connects to the cultural industry critique of society, where you do have this commodification of subjective relations, and then this objectification and instrumentalization of thought. So all the things that critical theorists never wanted to have in a society, basically.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to clarify his academic career in the United States. I mean, he was associated briefly with Columbia, the Russian research project at Columbia, where he wrote his book on Soviet Marxism, and then got a job at Brandeis in the philosophy department. And he was there for quite a while, but it is true that the president, Sacker, his name was, Abraham Sacker, was his opponent. And Marcuse's career was cut short. He was not allowed to stay after the official retirement age. But he then moved to a very successful final few years at the University of California in San Diego, where he had quite a number of both colleagues and students. So I would say he's not academically really an outsider. This is not a figure who couldn't get a job. Now, politically, it's interesting. Marcuse was always, in a way, very militant. In the 19-teens, he was involved in the German Revolution. He was, still, I would say, if not a fellow traveler, he was sympathetic to Leninism much longer than some of the others. And one can find in even the writings in the late 30s and 40s, moments in which he begins to talk the way more of a Leninist might. I mean, not by any means a Soviet apologist, but still in ways that suggest that he had not fully broken, let's say, with certain organizational models that the Leninists, the Bolshevik Revolution had created. In the 1960s, he became a public face of critical theory as a stimulant to non-traditional forces of resistance, what he called the Great Refusal, which meant a kind of widespread rejection of any type of complicity with a system that was basically corrupt. Now, the other Frankfurt School members, the ones who had gone back to Germany in particular, were more, we might say, complicit is the right word, but they certainly played a role within the system. Horkheimer was the chancellor for a while of the University of Frankfurt, or the director of the institute after a while. So they were establishment figures to a certain extent, and I don't want to overemphasize that. The students in Germany thought they had gone too far in that direction and were, for good or for bad reasons, hostile to what they saw as the betrayal of their more critical impulses. I mean, one has to really spend a lot of time unpacking what they did in post-war Germany to reestablish a decent, let's say, bourgeois democracy. And this was not simply a given. And one could make a lot of noise about being further on the left, but the real task, in a way, was to free Germany of its Nazi past. And they did, a pretty good job in helping to do that on radio and newspapers. They were involved in the public sphere. So that was their primary role. And, in the long run, I think they were successful. Now, whether or not they should have moved further to the left, they also had East Germany to deal with. And there was a kind of very explicit hostility to what was going on in East Germany, which was a Stalinist state. Now, as for Marcuse's politics, Marcuse was, as I say, always more militant, and sometimes went, from my perspective, too far in an anti-liberal, anti-pluralist direction. The most obvious example of that is his essay on repressive tolerance in the 1960s, which I've looked at recently again. It does not hold up. I mean, the basic argument of the essay is that there is truth and there is falsehood. The left has the truth, the right is basically ideological. And therefore, toleration for all ideas, including right-wing ideas, is a mistake. So the only ideas that should be tolerated are ideas which tell the truth, which are basically ideas of the left. Now, this is a highly, I would say, problematic assumption. First of all, that there's a single notion of truth in politics, something I've argued against, drawing a Hannah Arendt elsewhere, but also the idea that the left always has it, and the right never has anything on its side that is worth taking seriously. And this is the further assumption that there are mechanisms, let's call it the state or I don't know what, big tech, that has the wisdom to know the difference between the truth and falsehood, and then has the right to suppress false ideas. Now, boy, you get into an awful lot of trouble when you go in that direction. And so I always felt very uneasy with that. The last essay in Genesis and Validity is an essay on free speech. And, I try to argue about the teloses of free speech. And truth-telling is one of them, but there are many others as well, it seems to me. And I think Marcuse was a little bit simplistic in that essay in particular. So there was a time where his militant politics, I think, got him perhaps in a bit of trouble.
Just because I think this perfectly segues into your answer. Camille put it as, do you think that Marcuse and Adorno romanticized the past to an extent? I kind of want to modify that a bit. Don't you think the reason why they seem to have this idea that left had the right ideas or the correct ideas was like, it seems to me they were a bit sort of still idealistic, and this German idealism of Hegel and this idea of a perfect, end to a story. You know what I mean? Like, it feels to me like they seem to still harbor some idealism that sort of blinded them to their own subjectivity. I don't know if Camille wants to add something.
No, my question with romanticism was a tiny bit different, so I can come back to that. But just what you mentioned about Marcuse's last work, which seemed to have on repression, which seems to also get a lot of its criticism, what you said about the idea of there being one truth, that also resonates a lot with right now and some of the arguments that we hear about, there should be only this way or that way, that, there is a scientific truth, for instance, that the mainstream media with a lot of things say, and they try to censor everything else. It just made me think that also right now that could also be a problematic idea, what he was saying in his last book. But sorry, back to Sam.
Well, these are immense questions. First on nostalgia or romanticization of the past. They were very explicit about not doing that. That is to say, they understood that modernity was complicated, that modernity brought with it many, many ills, and that there were, let's say, losses that were, that accompanied also the gains. But they never thought we could go back to an ideal earlier period. That there was something, let's say, in the medieval period or classical Rome or Greece or whatever. This was a standard against which we could measure the fall of humanity into something that was worse. So the dialectic of the Enlightenment meant both that the Enlightenment was not simply progress, but also that it had to be to some extent salvaged against the counter-Enlightenment, against the people who said, no, the Enlightenment was simply a loss of the age of faith or whatever. So they were very, very explicit about that. And they countered the nostalgia that one could see on the right, but also, a certain leftist nostalgia. Lukács, for example, certain of his writings had a kind of nostalgia for the epic era of, Greece and so forth. So that they did not hold. However, having said that, they were also not celebrants of progress as if the past was always somehow benighted and needed to be left behind. So one had to read the past, this is, say, Walter Benjamin's great contribution, as a field of, let's say, debris of ruins that needed to be reconstellated in new ways that allowed the future to be nourished by aspects of the past that were still, in a sense, critical of the present. So this is a multi-temporality, and someone like Ernst Bloch, who was friendly with them in certain circumstances, not in others, would have called the non-synchronicity of the present, that there is a sense in which the present has residues of the past and emergent possibilities of the future, and all three are mixed up. And the past had moments of what Bloch called not yet utopianism, in which there was an anticipation of something which had not yet been achieved, but which were worth taking seriously as possibly to be achieved in the future. So just to speak to your point about Hegel. Now, the Frankfurt School is not necessarily Hegelian Marxist in any simple sense, but they took Hegel very seriously. And Adorno in particular, his 3 essays on Hegel, 3 studies of Hegel, talked about aspects of Hegel which needed to be preserved. And the dialectical method, even though not positive, was one of them. He wanted to use it in a negative dialectical way. But what he said at one point, which is quite fascinating, my lead essay in Genesis of Validity, I draw on this. He said that we should not always judge the past by current standards. We should not always appreciate a figure like Hegel or a figure like Nietzsche or a figure like Marx or Freud according to what we think is right. That we should not apply our standards, but in fact, often judge the present by the standards of the past. That we should judge ourselves in terms of what Hegel had hoped for, judge ourselves in terms of maybe what Marx had hoped for. That the past somehow had values, norms, even practices that maybe is superior to our own. Now, it doesn't mean in every respect, it doesn't mean we should recover the past as it once supposedly was. That would be idealistically romantic in the wrong way. But we shouldn't say that the cutting edge of the present is the sole standard. And this, in a way, speaks to the issue, for example, of the current cancel culture when it comes to figures in the past who may not live up to our standards of righteousness in the present. That we sometimes have to understand them as flawed, but also understand ourselves as flawed. And so I always, I used to tell my students that, look, in the year 2200, when everybody is a vegan, they're going to say, hey, this guy Martin Luther King used to eat meat. We have to cancel him. That everything he stood for was garbage because he still ate meat. And so we have to be very careful about that kind of presentist attitude towards figures in the past who may have something to teach us. So this is not romanticization. It's not nostalgia. It's a more complicated attitude about the relationship between past, present, and future, which I think has much to teach us.
Okay, so let's get into these 2 books, Eros and Civilization and One-Dimensional Man. And one more note of context, this one is a bit more personal, but I have a real affinity for Marcuse, and I think it has to do with the time that I read it, and in a class, in a political philosophy class, Eros and Civilization, which is, it had just been a year where I had switched from being fully apolitical, not being into politics, philosophy, or any of these things, to suddenly being obsessed with leftist politics and being absolutely into politics. So, my headspace had moved from, thinking of consumerism and these kind of things to suddenly thinking about leftist politics a lot. So I think what Marcuse says a lot in his book, Eros and Civilization, or little short quotes and here and there that I might refer to a little bit now, it really resonated a lot with me. So I think if I would have read Marcuse now or later, I might have been more critical on some of the things. I might be less sympathetic perhaps to an extent, but yeah, I just wanted to give that little bit of context. But in the book Eros and Civilization, before I read a few quotes, I just wanted to summarize my understanding of it. So this is his biggest book that really touches on Freud. Really, it's based on Freud's book Civilization and Its Discontents. He has a critique of it, but he also very heavily relies on it. And pretty much based on what I understand, and this also involves a little bit of critique that he has of Freud, is yes, we are being repressed, and yes, we are being people are alienated all the time. But unlike, based on my understanding, what Freud believed, that you just had to repress yourself and repress a lot of your urges in order to have a functioning civilization. He differs from here, and it's no, it's not the environment and all this that makes you be repressed. It's men that make you be repressed for a capitalist society at the time, and you do not need to be this repressed or this alienated from your work. So this is kind of my understanding of what the book's main argument is, and also where he differs with Freud. So where he differs with Freud is no, we don't need to be repressed to this extent, and this doesn't come because otherwise we'll just go crazy and kill ourselves. No, it comes from the capitalist, from our current system. I don't know if you have something there that you want to add or anything, or if not, I can just read a few quotes.
Just before you read the quotes, yeah, I think that's a pretty important distinction that Marcuse has, even with Adorno and Horkheimer and other. Maybe I think maybe to Eric Fromm is potentially closer to him, but they don't. Yeah, they don't necessarily see the release of man's id, or the repressed self, as necessarily fully positive, like as positive a thing as Marcuse think it is, and that's in many in some parts may explain the different political outlooks they took on the ground. So which we discuss later, like regarding student movements and all that. But yeah, I mean, after you read the quotes, I want to just ask you a couple of questions. But
yeah, well, I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but I'll try. But yeah, the quotes are small. So on purpose, there's two, there's short ones. So the first one, I think, just summarizes what I said, which he says, the effective subjugation of the instinct to repressive controls is not imposed by nature, but by man. So that's kind of his argument that goes against Freud. We don't have to be controlling ourselves this way. It's like other men who have decided to do this in order to make
Freud
money from us. Yeah, go ahead.
Freud doesn't. Oh, okay. Make money from. All right. Well, it's not like Freud is saying like nature.
No, by nature, I think.
But I think Freud thinks it's a relatively good idea. Like not relatively. I mean, I'm putting it in there. So like,
but by nature, I don't think he really talked about environment. Like nature, that was the word that Marcuse used in here, right? It wasn't mine. I was reading a quote. So I think he kind of means naturally. I think. I don't know.
I guess. Yeah. All right. Okay. What you
it's not like a tree, like imposing. That's not what he means. He kind of means like it doesn't have to be this way. It's not just like a fact of life.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying Freud's view is better like framed as but it's good, like both, like the sexual drive, Eros, is this sort of selfish id, and then later on the death drive is this id looking for distraction. So they both, it's not bad idea for them to be tamed, but I guess Marcuse would probably disagree, or would say that the way we tame them is actually repression in a negative way.
Exactly, that is true. But I think you also made a good point there, which is that like all hell would not break loose if we didn't repress them, which Freud, if I understand, thinks that it would.
Most of them, maybe not all.
Yeah, like a little island where you can survive, but yeah, that's
the four main floors of hell. Not all seven.
Then another one, which is, again, now I see like, this is like so Marxist meets Freud, but this is like a concept, not so much a quote, which he introduces surplus repression. So surplus repression is the restrictions necessitated by social domination. This is distinguished from basic repression. Do you want me to read a part again?
What suppression?
Surplus repression. Surplus.
Right.
Surplus repression. So that's the restrictions necessitated by social domination. This is distinguished from basic repression, which is the modification of the instincts necessary for the perpetuation of the human race in civilization. So it's kind of like, I read it as, in my head back in there, I can just see how this made so much so much fun and sense. So he's like saying, this is additional amount of repression that is happening, surplus repression, which surplus to me sounds very Marxist. I'm pretty sure like Marx uses that a lot, and this is added on to the repression in order to turn us into profit-making machines.
What is can you give examples of two different types of repression?
So yeah, I was actually thinking of different types of I don't know if he would say this, but this is surplus repression that is not necessary. So let's say, I don't know, maybe this example, but I thought of gigantic corporations or in places where there's a lot of money trying to keep wages low for kind of no reason. So I mean, maybe my example doesn't really go with it, but keeping the wages low, surplusing extra repression for the sake of making profit, and it's not needed. You could give more money. there is more money to be given. So that's in this. I'm trying to
But
think of an
repression,
example.
but
But
by
him,
itself is unnecessary. So you know what I mean? Like,
but this is
you could
additional necessitated by social domination, or perhaps in order to keep everything in order. So maybe my example wasn't too well, but in order to keep people in order, there is this need for this surplus repression. But I kind of understood it also as more to like increase the amount of profit and everything that is made. Like you don't need for society to work, even if you're going to have like a for-profit society, even that you don't need to go as far as you do, or like people shouldn't need to have to work 80 hours a week. There are examples where in other countries people work 40 hours a week or less, and it's enough for things to keep on turning and for people to have money. You don't need to repress people to that extent. So that's kind of my understanding, I think.
But then again, but I don't yeah, but it's like saying, yeah, but what is the qualitative difference between the two types of different suppression? One just seems to be more of the other instead of like differing radically.
Yeah, more, I guess, yeah. So maybe my understanding is not
just more
that good, but he differentiated from basic repression, and basic repression, I think, is what Freud would say, which is kind of the repression needed for civilization. That's really what I was saying, for civilization to continue. Whereas surplus repression is kind of this additional repression that is needed in order for a certain group in a society, I guess, to dominate over the rest of society and the environment. That's kind of my understanding.
Look, the reason why I kind of asked you this question and pinpointed that was kind of because even though you have the affinity for Marcuse, like I thought, like in my head, he was the easiest one in like before I started reading, but his writing to me proved to be the most challenging. And in my view, he just, yeah, a lot of his writing is not very precise and is, yeah, it's kind of like the things we criticize Jungian writers for. It's like, it's not very precise. Maybe it is so precise, like you have to know everything Marcuse has written and it all refers back to something in there, and maybe I don't know enough, but it's just, yeah, a lot of places I don't really understand them, and I have some examples, but
yeah,
sorry,
I think I mean, we've talked about this so many times. Some, I think, political philosophy, they often write like this, but secondly, I think it's a bit of the latter, which is like, for instance, if someone reads you a sentence from here, which I don't have, but let's say, imagine there's one, and in it, there's the word performance principle. And you're like, or like, there's like performance principle and reality principle. You're like, what the hell are you talking about? But to be fair to him, in his book, he explains what reality principle is. He explains what performance principle is. That is like the current one. So he explains them, but, you know, I do agree. So some of these terms, you know, as you see, he does talk about them in advance.
No, yes, but also, like, I'll read an example later on.
Yeah, no, for sure.
He's talking of, he's talking about things that are personal experiences, for example, and I don't know how.
But aren't all political philosophers are like this? I mean, you're contrasting that with the current modern, and I'm not saying a positivist study, right? I'm not talking about positivism, but just the other kind that is accepted in academia. You're kind of contrasting it to that. Whereas to me, political philosophers, from all the ones I've read from Plato and I've seen in classes coming up to the later ones, Hobbes, Rousseau and all this, they weren't based on personal experience, but they were based on personal anecdotal observations to an extent, perhaps you could say, if it's fair, past writing, philosophical ways of writing and thinking. So I think you can say that, but I think that criticism is fair for every single political philosopher that they teach you at university.
I think it's fair for a lot of them, but you have to take into account the historical progress of a discipline as well. Like we've had, which influenced a lot of these authors, David Hume, which really, in my view, comes up with the, you know, it sort of puts an end to philosophy as a, you know, he did like address a lot of this idea that pretty much you can't be sure about anything because your senses are compromised and everything is compromised. So these guys are writing after that. So it does feel a bit like they're not acting, they're talking. I mean, shall I just read one example?
Yeah, for sure, because I only have two other ones, short ones left anyway, but yeah, go ahead.
All right, let me just read this example. For example, this is like this is from Eros and Civilization, which I read far less than One-Dimensional Man. Art challenges the prevailing principle of reason. In representing the order of sensuousness, it invokes a tabooed logic, the logic of gratification is against that of repression. Behind the sublimated aesthetic form, this unsublimated content shows forth. So first of all, I mean, maybe that's part of the translation. Like, why do we need so many difficult words? And maybe it's necessary and it's explained. But besides that, art challenges the prevailing principle of reason. I mean, that's a very limited, in my view, definition of art, or a very idealistic one if you think that's what constitutes art.
Your criticism there then gets to the heart of the Frankfurt School, especially Adorno and Marcuse. Because I mean, they both.
I think Marcuse more than Adorno.
Marcuse more, because you're right. Yeah. Because in One-Dimensional Man as well, based on what I've read, he even, this part I disagree, and like I'll disagree more in One-Dimensional Man, but now you brought it up. He kind of says that, like, he doesn't say that art can be the vehicle to change people fully by itself, but he believes in art being the mechanism to like elevate people over their current level of thinking. And they think that, you know, real non-commodified art has this power of making people think and imagine and all this, which is I mean, you're not gonna get me to argue with you too much here. If I understood their works right, again, I took a class 10 years ago. I read a little bit of their stuff, and then we had these interviews. So I might be totally wrong for anybody watching.
No, but my main point is that not that even necessarily I disagree with what he's saying. I'm just saying that if I was writing this in this day and age, or in his day and age, I would have said, art could be this, not art is.
Yeah.
The self-assuredness they have when they talk about these things. And I mean, when we go to Adorno and stuff, I have some examples as well. But Marcuse especially is somewhat off-putting. You know, it's kind of like it's almost like reading an opinion piece and somebody ranting and, you know, that type of thing. So that's what I mean stylistically, not even content-wise.
I get
because
you.
if it was just could be instead of is, that would make a whole world of difference for me anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, you agree. And nowadays I'm just thinking about if you were put the word is instead of could or can in like a scientific paper, you better have like 5 or 6 citations that really prove why you're saying is and can. Even if you put can, you can't just put can, but you can put can and reference 2 people. If you're putting is, you better have like a picture of God to like
you better have a meta-analysis study of all the papers published. So the tone is, and it's not like, you know, he doesn't reference anything. So it's like, you know, it's
again, I just, for me, just doesn't, I mean, you know, you read these political philosophy stuff, and to me, there's like some interesting thoughts in there. You group them and package them with other stuff. But if you take that kind of dissecting approach to it, I mean, I just want to say I agree with you to a large extent, but I just don't view them in that way, perhaps.
No, I wanted to. This was, I mean, I thought it was a good place to insert my
definitely.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, good. Listen to this other quote. So this one again, very, very Marxist, if you ask me. I feel like Eros and Civilization, I know it's all about Freud, but you can write a version without Freud. So he wrote, if society cannot use its growing productivity for reducing repression, productivity must be turned against the individuals. It becomes in itself an instrument of universal control. So here, if I understand what he's saying, or my interpretation is that now we've reached in society a point where we're not trying to be productive because we need to be productive in order to make enough food and all this. No, we're productive for the sake of being productive, and that is used in order to make sure that everybody aligns and stays in their lane. So again, that's how I understand it. And yeah, I can see how back then and even now, I mean, I agree to it to a large extent, very Marxist. statement, if you ask
Yeah.
me. I don't know if you have anything there. And then I just
this
have...
actually in a way touches on my other biggest criticism of
Go
him,
ahead.
especially, but Frankfurt School as a whole. Yeah, that's this is my main problem, I think, with Marxism as a whole, or maybe Freudism as a whole. This like, I mean, let me just get this from, yeah. You know, they talk about all these people, Marx, Marcuse, and all these people were building up on this idea of alienation. And I mean, if you read the quote again in the beginning, it specified that in our times, like there is this idea that instrumental rationality is something that is unique to our times and to our capitalist stage. And that's what I completely disagree with. If you look at ancient societies, you find many examples of societies overproducing, for example, certain products while many die of hunger, you know. So, or instrumental, I think there are many examples of instrumental rationality in ancient societies, in medieval societies. This uniqueness, this sort of uniqueness of, I mean, in the preface to, I think, Dialectics of Entire Enlightenment, or another one, they literally refer to it, that in our modern age that has become. I just don't agree with that part. I think that's always been part of a evolution of an idea. I mean, it's really interesting when we talk about Horkheimer and religion. I reference that, but I think they seem to think it's a very unique thing that is happening historically now, while it's been pretty much, in my view, always been a sort of a process of ups and downs. And yeah,
I couldn't agree with you more. That is what I find quite off-putting a little bit. And if I understand one-dimensional and two-dimensional thought, that's also what I don't get. And I feel like in general, there's always, I mean, in the beginning of this episode, we talked about how the current period that they were writing was a bit specific and very like particular context, and context always matters. But a lot of the time, whether it's them or other people in general, you always want to make your period seem like particular, or believe that it's particular. And then you say, this exists now, and I follow you and I agree. I'm like, yes, it is like this. But then they're like, back in the day. So, you know, they do a different version of back in the day. It wasn't like this. And I agree with you. I don't believe it. I don't see it. I mean, was reason not instrumentalized during other periods, you know, before capitalism, keeping peasants in order to do just this, other people in order? So, I mean, it goes back, and it's always existed. So I don't get, I mean, I know that capitalism, perhaps someone would counter that with being like, no, you're not taking into consideration the state of technology that we've reached right now. Fair enough. It has changed it. It has changed the way it looks. It has maybe changed the scale of it, its ability, its efficiency. But saying that it didn't exist and that previously people weren't trying to do these same things and that the same things weren't going on. I agree with you.
My view may sound very stupid and pretty much like a street view of history, but I think as technology increased, we increasingly managed to we managed to increase the amount of surplus in society, and therefore a lifestyle that allows us to become alienated, allows us to become, I think in One Dimensional Man, at some point he says, you become separated from the process of the production, and then you become alienated, I think, from everything. That just happened to fewer people, and as history goes by, it becomes more and more widespread. But in case of Marcuse, I think it's funny, in Marcuse's writing, I really could see the criticism of lack of internationalism and provincialism, because mainly he's referring back, for example, in Eros and Civilization, to writings of Hegel, Schiller, and all that type of stuff. So very much, you know, following in the German tradition. And he's very much talking about a very unique experience in Western Europe and America, I think. Not so much, maybe to a lesser extent, maybe middle class in Soviet Union.
But yeah, so I mean, I agree that different eras have their particularities, but often we think that previously this didn't exist, but only exists now. I mean, before there were factories and before it was like the process of building something was just divided less. So, there would be like less carpenters who would just fix like a part of the chair. They would rather fix the whole chair. Whereas by then, they were really in this factory place where, they were working for someone and producing. But I think of agriculture, and agriculture goes back, way further than the Industrial Revolution. And agriculture also is like, segregated. So like, some people were just like growing wheat, like, and, not like growing everything that they wanted and stuff in a garden.
Majority of like we're talking about agriculture, like not majority, a significant amount of agricultural work and a lot of other work was done by slaves who were surely alienated from like society. And and I would add this romantic idea that, for example, I don't know where this chair example you said kind of reminds me. I feel like I read it but like this idea that if you worked as a sort of a blacksmith or like a carpenter, you weren't as alienated from your work as you are when you work in a factory on an assembly line. I'm not sure if that's the case necessarily. Even like I don't know what is the specific evidence for that, or so I think there is a bit of a romanticism. And by the way, which in there is a segment in One Dimensional Man where Marcuse talks about how romanticism is I'm basically doing a bad like thing by, it's almost like it's a slur that people use, and I guess it is, and I think it is rightfully thrown at Marcuse at some points, because I do think I don't know what he's talking about, like when he's not talking about the perfect society what he wants, but what it's implied through his criticism is like, I don't know, it's like this society that all of these things could not have been. I don't know.
I mean, like the first quote that I read you about the subjugation of the instinct not being done by nature but by man, before too, like for thousands of years it's been by man, and or other things that they talk about, the control of man over nature. I know it reaches a new level with Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, but previously, again, the Agricultural Revolution, I mean, you read about how they would burn down parts of the forest and all these things in order to like, kill animals that they didn't want, or take over territory. So I know it wasn't done at this level. That is for sure.
Scale.
Like at the same scale. Sorry, that's a better word. But and in One Dimensional Man, I mean, I'm just fixated on one thing on One Dimensional Man. I think that goes very well with your critique here. So we'll get to that. Let me just read you one last quote, and maybe we won't get into this one too much.
And I have one more quote from Eros. Yeah.
So this one, I get it, but it can perhaps be a bit hard. So we designated this reality principle as the performance principle. And we attempted to show that domination and alienation derived from the prevalent social organization of labor determined to a large extent the demands imposed upon the instinct by this reality principle. So if you understand reality principle and performance principle and what he means, it makes much more sense.
Sam.
And again,
Can you read the first part again? I really didn't.
We designated this reality principle as the performance principle because he says like, okay, so reality principle goes back to Freud's pleasure principle. So we have a pleasure principle with all the things that we want to do, but then we can't. So there's this reality principle that imposes itself to calm us down so we don't get ourselves killed even, right? Let alone doing harm to others. Marcuse says though, so I guess this part is much more, he's contextual here. He says the current reality principle is called performance principle because it's based on competition between firms and corporations and, making the most generating the most profit out of them. In any case, he calls the current reality principle the performance principle because it's very much based on this performance principle. So this is like, again, what he adds again to what Freud's way of thinking, right?
Like,
and this comes from the demands imposed. And this reads to domination and our current alienation, doesn't come from the reality principle, but by the current type of reality principle, which he calls the performance principle, which is early
The
capitalism. Yeah. So
the
during that
current
time,
type of reality principle is the performative principle. I get it.
yeah. So that's why I'm saying you need to like somehow you need to get down. And man, the teacher that I did this class with, so she first did Marx, thought that was relevant. Then a week or two after, we moved on to Freud, Civilization as Discontent. Then she moved on to Eros and Civilization, and
perfect.
It makes far more sense. And I emailed her, but yeah, didn't manage to get her.
Well, we tried.
Yeah, but she would have been good for explaining these this way. But yeah, that was it for my Eros and Civilization.
I think instead of, to be honest, it's really funny because I think they've done by the way, my headphone might go out. They've done a great job, in my view, the Frankfurt School, at further refining Marx and Freud and using them in the best way possible, potentially, or one of the best way possible. But instead of like refining it in a general sense, like you know, they've done it just for a specific time period, which I don't necessarily agree. And but are we going to move to one-dimensional man? Because I wanted to have one more quote from Eros.
Please, yeah, so please go.
So this is going back to my original criticism of them viewing, first of all, viewing art as this sort of again different in our time compared to the past, which I completely disagree with. And as you said, this was my second part of my art criticism, as art as this influential thing, which I think is the most negative legacy of Frankfurt School, which has led to privilege walks and this idea of representation becoming far more important than class analysis. Sorry. So yeah, I think this is a bit of a long quote, but it you know, I read quite a lot about Frankfurt School, and people say that they were, especially Adorno, and I think it's more true about Adorno, that they were writing against sort of this idealism that was existence in Hegel and all that. But when you read things like that, it kind of, I don't know, it throws me off. But it's a bit long, but
people will be able to read on their screen, so they'll be able to follow it much better than me right now.
All right. So let me start from a beginning of a sentence, but still you have to read the actual thing to get it. But yeah, whatever. But in the established civilization, the relation has been an antagonist one. Instead of reconciling both impulses by making sensuousness rational and reason sensuous, civilization has subjugated sensuous to reason in such a manner that the former, if it reasserts itself, does so in a destructive and savage form. While the tyranny of reason impoverishes and barbarizes sensuousness, the conflict must be resolved if human potentialities are to realize themselves freely. Since only the impulses have the lasting force that fundamentally affects the human existence, such reconciliation between the two impulses must be worked of a third impulse. Schiller defines this third mediating impulse as the play impulse. Its objective as beauty and its goal as freedom. We shall presently try to rescue the full content of Schiller's notion from the benevolent aesthetic treatment to which the traditional interpretation has confided in. The quest is for the solution of a political problem, the liberation of man from the inhuman existential condition. Schiller states that in order to solve the political problem, one must pass through the aesthetic, since it is beauty that leads to freedom. So, I mean, there is a lot of assumptions, a lot of generalizations about the role that civilization plays, the role that art plays or should play. Like a lot of it is an ought to a statement, but it's written in an is a statement. You know, like the personal view of Marcuse, which is a beautiful one, or Schiller, that aesthetic and beauty is a road to freedom or road to emancipation or road to reconciling the reason with the impulses and all that. But it's a very much an ought to a statement, I feel, rather than a descriptive statement, which is it is presented as, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, like, the quote like this without having it in front of on the screen, it's kind of hard for me to follow. However, on what you're saying, I agree with what you're saying, and it's like, I don't know. Once again, it's like I have like a good faith approach towards political philosophers. I feel like you need to take some of the stuff that they say with a grain of salt, place it in the right context and place, and apply it to the right population in your head, and then it makes much more sense what they're saying. Like Marcuse, when I was first reading this stuff, getting away from consumerism and not only thinking about all that, for me, I put myself in like the mind of like middle class people in North America, and in that sense, thinking about the obsession that so many people had, including myself, with only that. Don't get me wrong, I still look forward to buy stuff every now and then, but I would argue that there's a difference. So I just feel like, you have to do a bit of the work yourself. And, this made me think the other day, I was like, these kind of books by political philosophers, in a way, are at times kind of like the raw data that people collect in other studies. And then you need like a teacher or someone to like interpret them and be like, put this one in the right context and that one in the right place, and then present it to you. So yeah, I don't know what you make of half-baked theory of how to, approach these kind of works and stuff, but I think to me it helps.
No, I would disagree with you there a bit. It sounds like raw data. I think it's kind of like, as I mentioned like a couple of times, and that's maybe why some of our criticisms are completely unjustified. It's almost like they write in a unique language, and you
Yeah,
it's
that
like
too, for
any
sure.
like, sometimes I help doctors with like their articles in English, and even though I know English like technically well, I can't, because I don't know the specific language they use in their work. So it kind of feels like that. Sometimes they're using language in such a unique way that maybe I don't understand. So you go to a professor, and it kind of like Michael Seguro, somebody who has read everything ever, and he can tell you what he says here is referring to this
100%.
specific word used in like Plato's whatever. So I think that's partially hard.
I think
Makes
that's
it
a
very
bare
hard to
minimum.
access.
I think that's a bare minimum with their kind of writings and stuff. Like they love, I mean, all political philosophers, again, I say, yeah, they refer to other philosophers, that's usually like the information that they go on, and yeah, and then they take their words and then they use them and then they add their own words. I mean, I also saw in an interview Marcuse was saying, like, they were asking Marcuse, why does Adorno kind of use these strange words? And he was like, well, Adorno believes that these other words, their meanings have been tainted. Therefore, you need to use another word in order to get the true meaning across. So yeah, fair enough. I mean, the
Look,
meaning of words do change and all that. So yeah, that's why political philosophy, like just picking it up and reading it, you either must put in a lot of your own work or you must know about it a lot. I mean, it's one of those that I find that with a teacher explaining, it makes a world of difference.
yeah, no, fair enough. I must say though, it does betray a contradiction within them that is so odd to me, that they are talking about how art has this emancipatory power, or writing and philosophy and all that does, but at the same time their own work is so inaccessible to anyone who's not familiar with like history of, I don't know, philosophy or something. They use, or at least in translation, the vocabulary used is just so difficult.
Yeah.
For, I feel like sometimes for like same sentence could have been said much easier. Like you read Martin J and it's a whole like different word compared to when you read these guys sometimes. Although I would say Adorno and Horkheimer are much better than Marcuse.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But I mean, I used to always think that of Marx. I was like, why does he use all of these kind of words? Where a simpler idea, at least nowadays, the idea can be conveyed in much simpler terms. So yeah, there's also the element of translation that you introduced, German style and also French style. I'm not dealing with French people, being different than the English style, less about conciseness and, synthesis.
Yeah. I know. But I would say Marx is, again, writing in a different era, and
Yeah.
I would say Marx I found more boring because of his constant economic shit about like the tree disclosure thing in Germany where they forests become like private land. Oh my God. Adam Smith is the same. The most boring, like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, okay, too many examples, enough. Like,
Yeah.
Anyway,
But
sorry. Man.
okay, should we move on to One Dimensional Man quickly and then go to all our
Sure.
interviews? I'm sorry, we wanted this video to be more interviews, but we just can't help it. We just have an issue. We just keep on talking and talking. So make sure to go check out their full interviews. I think it would perhaps be much more educational and informative.
And there is timestamps. You can always skip our bullshit.
Timestamps. Listen, we're the timestamps channel. Okay, it's there.
Timestamps.
All right, so let's move on to One Dimensional Man, a book that I didn't read in class and was written 9 years after Eros and Civilization. Go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just I know you're gonna give an introduction to One Dimensional Man, but just after that or before that, can you just say what did you think was the differences between his thought from Eros to One Dimensional Man? Like what because I haven't been as deep. Like what did he change anything in your view?
I mean, I hadn't thought about this before. I would say that One Dimensional Man seems to be far more influenced from his experiences in the United States. Freud is there, I'm guessing, Freud affected the first generation Frankfurt School a lot. But I think, Eros and Civilization is literally about Freud's work. So these are the two things. Actually, yeah, and I would say like One Dimensional Man is really more about that sweet spot of the second half of the, right after post-World War II, like really like when he wrote it and about the US more and more about media and technology, perhaps. That's it. But I'd be lying if I said I read One Dimensional Man from cover to cover. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask, and I read it by myself. So I tried my best to get the parts that I understood.
No, fair enough. I just wanted to know if there was, but that's the feeling I got. I haven't read it cover to cover either, by the way. But that's the feeling I got, that Freud got relegated to a sort of a supporting character, slightly. And yeah, I would say there is, from the segments I read, there is more focus on techniques and all that. And
yeah,
I have a couple of quotes I like to read, but yeah.
And I think, and you mentioned art. And I think the part of the book that I read less, which is the second half, is really about how to escape our current situation through art.
Yeah.
So I think the second part actually read a lot about that. But yeah, based on my understanding of what One Dimensional Man is about, and what a name for a book. I mean, love it. Just on the surface, One Dimensional Man, one-dimensional thinkers. People out there, middle class, they're just concerned with consumerism. They don't think properly. So it's just beautiful headline whoever came up with that title. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't believe Hollywood hasn't had a movie with this name yet. Or to be honest, it's a perfect for a Coen Brothers, like a story. Like the characters they cover, these like sort of usual sort of idiots type, like that they think they have. Like they plan stuff, but and
I guess then it means what you think about one dimensional, what he actually means by that, and it can be used in all different kinds of contexts.
It's a great title. It could be an action title. It could be like any title.
Man,
it's fantastic.
I remember after we read Eros and Civilization in class. So it was like near the summer, and then I go and look up. I'm like, what? This guy has a book with the title One Dimensional Man. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, this paradise. Then I remember taking the book from the library and like not being able to really read it and understand it. So I think in the past 10 years, I've actually progressed a bit, and I managed to read it by myself a little bit. I remember like having a difficult time and being like, oh, I'm not getting this as easily as I did when the teacher was explaining it.
Man, like that. Yeah, university is such a good thing. Like the best professors are the best. Like help for reading a book. Like what was this?
Especially bachelor level class and stuff, when it's like the teachers doing the talking rather than these master level classes where there's like a few other folks on you who are either like you or maybe even have less interest, and you're all sharing your thoughts, so to speak. I'm more of the old school kind of person when it comes to universities. But anyway, that's a topic for a different day, perhaps. But Sam, one-dimensional man, based on what I understand, is that, okay, especially in the US and all this, because of how much people consume media and all the endless consumption, especially through the media, we have developed all these kind of false needs, and we're just always concerned with these false needs, get the new this, get the new that this has turned us into one-dimensional thinkers, meaning that we cannot think critically about society and our own position, society, and just society in general. That is my understanding of the core arguments made in this book. And then I can kind of move on to what I find a little criticism based on what I understand.
What would you say the one-dimensional man is?
A one-dimensional man is, let's say, someone who, let's say it's easier for me to imagine, especially like if someone is not working, but a one-dimensional 18 or 19-year-old is someone from a middle-class-ish bourgeois kind of family, so they have some money. But even not that, it can also be the working class, and Marcuse argues that this kind of thinking goes through all of the social classes now. So from all the way working class to the richest people, they even think this way now. So it's kind of like the person who is always concerned with, again, I see why I like Marcuse so much. Back in the day, I would think of this, waiting for the new iPhone to drop, and is like queuing up outside the store for a whole day. The next day, all he's thinking is about getting this new Nike shoe and this and that. And that's all they think about, and consuming this kind of media and that, and never like think critically. That's kind of what I understand. I don't know if that helps.
No, I think that makes sense.
People who are into mindless consumerism, I would say that's the one-dimensional man.
All right, no, that's fair enough.
And so let me read one quote here, and then my criticism of it. So one-dimensional thought is systematically promoted by the makers of politics and the purveyors of mass information. Their universe of discourse is populated by self-validating hypotheses which, incessantly and monopolistically repeated, become hypnotic definitions of dictations, right? So politicians, the media, they just say these things all the time, so much in this dogmatic way that just becomes how you think, and you can't think in any other way, and you just take that as being the gospel. And that is the one-dimensional thought, based on what I understand, which I think that is true. If you look at the media or the way that they talk about it, they just say the same discourses, the same thing over and over again. So I agree when Marcuse says that about the current state in time. And I know that perhaps it was different back then because the context was a bit different, but the same thing was trying to be achieved. And this is where I disagree with Marcuse, which is, if I understand correctly, and unfortunately we did put a lot of quote unquote critical questions to our interviewees, but I hadn't thought of the two-dimensional one. But if I understand Marcuse correctly, he was saying that before, let's say, the Industrial Revolution, or just like a century or two before, people were able to critically, or like, of course it's still able to, or people were often critically thinking about their society and government, or however society is organized. And they had this quote unquote two-dimensional thought. The one-dimensional being the one that just follows what is told and said without thinking critically. But they also had the second part of their brain, which was very critical, which I know people have, and people do still have if you really start getting, deep past the surface. So that's the part that, I'm not sold, which is like back in the day, people were, in general, far more critical of the way their things were going, and they would think critically and all this. This is the part where I don't buy too much, if I understood Marcuse's argument properly. So if somebody would like to correct me, please do so in the comment section. We'll make sure to get to them. And we're also thinking that if we get a lot of questions, we might invite another guest on, or maybe one of the ones who've already been, and just kind of put some of these other questions that came up while we're recording. But yeah, what do you make of this two-dimensional thing and that fact that people were able to think two-dimensionally? Am I like imposing my own understanding on this, or that's kind of what Marcuse was saying and you're not too sold either?
I agree with you in your characterization, but I remember from reading, I am looking for it right now, actually, in my notes, but I can't find it. But because I didn't highlight it, but I remember reading something. Doesn't he say somewhere that high art, which is for him like the end of things and all that, has always been only been able to be enjoyed by a few within a society, even back in the days? And doesn't that sort of mean that he thought even back in the days only a few were able to engage in critical thinking?
Perhaps that would make sense. So maybe again I'm misreading this part. I mean, I know Adorno says that even fine art was only accessible to a certain group, aka bourgeois and
so
well-off people.
Maybe it was Adorno then. Maybe
yeah. So maybe that's what they mean. But even
what do you have
if
any
that's
quotes
what it meant.
Do you have any quotes or anything regarding that?
Regarding two-dimensional man, no. And I looked it up, and he only refers to two-dimensional. Like I kind of command F this in the digital copy I had, and like 10 to 12 times. And this is just my general. Sorry, it came up 10 to 12 times, and this is the kind of understanding that I got. And I Googled it, of course, as well, because I was very interested in this two-dimensional thing. And this is the understanding I'm left with. But again, I could be wrong. And this is something I remember clearly we didn't put to the professors because, for instance, to Martin, Jay, and others, we put up like, hey, is it really worth using Freud? What's even the added value of that? And all this, these kind of quote unquote two-dimensional questions. Again, if I understood the concept of two-dimensional properly. But yeah, this we didn't do so.
That's because it was a lot of hard work doing the reading. So but I must say, I feel like if that's what he implies, that I guess they do, Marcuse and others in this school, but Marcuse especially believes in this idea that reason and instrumental rationality in its reason, it's in its current form, is increasing, taking over the world, and is making it even harder to have in a positive way rational understanding. So it would make sense if he says there was more dimensional thinking before than now. But I don't know whether, like, does he refer to early capitalist stage or just feudal stage, or what is he referring to, or all that? But yeah, I would disagree with him in the thing. I would say that seems to be like it's famously said that people get older, they become more conservative. And I think there is some truth to that. And I think that's just that becoming more one-dimensional is just that. As I think it becomes more rational as you get closer towards the end, as it becomes increasingly more rational to focus on immediate gratification because time is becoming less and less. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree. Well, I agree with, I agree with the analysis, but I don't agree with the historical specificity of the analysis.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if Marcuse was much more limited to this, I think he describes the current state. Out of everything that he says, I agree with his description of the current state for a specific segment of the population, very much so, like 100% agree. I just, whenever they look back in time, that's the part I don't get too much. And also when they prescribe how to, how we should move on, that's also the part where I'm much more hesitant. But that middle ground, I agree with them far, far more. Like one-dimensional thought is systematically promoted by the makers of politics and the purveyors of mass information. I mean, I can't really disagree with that without disagreeing with everything else I kind of come on here and say.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah. I wanted to, I have some quotes from him. I just wanted to, I mean, I'm not as familiar with his theoretical stuff, but from reading the segments that I read from One Dimensional Man, I do think he missed a lot of subtleties about the historical time that even he was living in,
100%.
as well as I have some like stuff about the things he sort of predicts and all that. So I thought maybe we can discuss those. If you're
Sounds good.
interested.
Yeah, on my end, I'm kind of done with all the stuff I had. This might have to turn into a 2-part video. We shall see.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. So let me just start with this. So he has this chapter in his book, Prospect of Containment. Is there any prospect that this chain of growing? So maybe that's not a perfect place to, let me just give a bit of background. So he's talking about this instrumental rationality and increased control of reason and all that becomes a part of aspect, becomes a part of our everyday life, right? And then he says, is there any prospect that this chain of growing productivity and repression may be broken? An answer would require an attempt to project contemporary development into future, assuming a relatively normal evolution. That is, neglecting the very possibility of a nuclear war. So you see, he was worried about a nuclear war. On this assumption, the enemy would remain permanent. That is, communism would continue to coexist with capitalism. At the same time, the latter would continue to be capable of maintaining and even increasing the standard of living for an increasing part of the population, in spite of and through intensified production of the means of destruction and methodological waste of resources and faculties. This capability has asserted itself in spite of and through toward wars and inexorable physical and intellectual regression brought about by the fascist system. Well, the fact of the matter is, not only nuclear war didn't happen, the communist society collapsed. So the communist, I mean, he says on this assumption, so I want to be fair to him, but his assumptions turn out to be wrong. Communism collapsed and capitalist societies proved to be increasingly deficient. In fact, the product, you know what I mean? Like you could argue America is far weaker internationally compared to what it was in 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think, you know, he was very much wrong about the way he viewed how history was going and how history was. Let me, another example I have, this is
which
from
is
much
one of the
later in
hardest
book.
things to do. I mean, I think even the biggest
Yeah,
Marxist
sure.
fan would not take any issue with you saying that, like, the historical arc that, you know, Marx says, you know, it hasn't really happened, and, you know, doesn't make too much sense. So yeah.
No, I definitely agree with that. Sorry, I can't find the exact quote, but there is another bit which I can't find here. But he talks about how, for example, he talks about how unions have become in a corporate rational thinking, in the corporatist rational thinking, unions have become an indispensable part of the organization because they play a crucial role in, you know, let's say subduing the workers or whatever. And again, this was a very ahistorical thing, you know, for example, Margaret Thatcher used to align herself with certain unions, for example, police union against other unions, like the firefighting unions, right? So this was very much a historical thing, not a constant sort of a evolving progressive situation.
And
that
in some context, it's correct, right?
I think in some, of course, some unions have become completely corrupt and part of the system. But to view it just like that is very, again, it's just the extent to what extent you apply Marcuse's analysis. Like, is it all encompassing? Because if it is, then it's probably wrong. But if you just apply it methodologically, maybe it's right.
Yeah, 100%. It just makes me think. So go ahead.
Sorry, just for example, look, this is like one of his ideas about the reason, just to give an idea of what he thinks is reason. And the new idea of reason is expressed in Whitehead's proposition. The function of reason is to promote the art of life. In view of this end, reason is the direction of the attack on environment, which derives from the threefold urge to live well, and to live better. So, when he's talking about reason and rationality and all that, he's talking about a very specific sort of idea that developed in his historical age.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I was just going to say, your example of the union things, I just feel like when you read his work, it's just like how I said, you have to kind of take your own examples and apply them in your own head. And then with some, it makes a lot of sense, and some completely disprove it. Like, yeah, you have to kind of like selectively apply, I believe, his observations and inferences.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, okay, yeah. But then he seems to be talking in very universal language.
Yeah. And this example of the union, it also made me realize another thing, which is, I mean, again, in a lot of ways, it is true. And you hear this critique other places, right? Like that, capitalism or capitalists will use these kind of things in order to make the system survive. And I think he makes this critique with everything. Like, if I believe, I mean, these parts I've more heard, I haven't read them myself, but, they would say like, if you say like, you're going to go protest, it's going to be like, well, be careful, because the way you're protesting is actually going to, it's the way that the system is going to use the status quo is going to use that in order to justify their existence and strengthen to them. So you think you're resisting them, but in fact you're doing the opposite, which yeah, so it always made me think like what kind of resistance he would think would work, right?
Is appropriate.
What some other examples? I wish I had some off the top of my head, but I've definitely heard some other ones where they say that.
But sorry, I just found the quote.
Please.
This was the quote regarding the unions. In the United States, one notices the collusion and alliance between business and organized labor. In Labor Looks at Labor, a conversation published by the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in 1969, we are told that what has happened is that union has become almost indistinguishable in its own eyes from the corporation. We see the phenomenon today of unions and corporations faintly lobbying. The union is not going to be able to convince missile workers that the company they work for is a think outfit when both the union and the corporation are out lobbying for bigger missile contracts and trying to get other defense industries into the area, or when they jointly appear before Congress and jointly ask that missiles instead of bombers should be built, or bombs instead of missiles, depending on what contract they happen to hold.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying that the interest of the organized labor and the corporation have become so identical that they are basically working for the same thing. And that's true, I think, but at the same time, there is a lot of other things going on. You could, for example, argue that, those workers, if there is, for example, unemployment benefit that is as good as their wages, they wouldn't be, the union won't be as much up for lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
Although you could argue the union has maybe its own bureaucratic interest in, its own continued existence. So, it's a bit too, I feel, too limiting to just.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that was a so it's a very good. So your point was like, well, it depends what the union is kind of doing, right? Like a bit more specifically on what they're fighting for. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously the arms industry is is one example. Like in other unions, things could be different. If like for example, blue collar unions, it could be a different way of organizing and putting unions together in a way that their interests don't necessarily align with the interest of the corporation at some points or at most points. Although I would agree with him that he's like a significant number of cases that has been the case. But I do think there is loads of cases that you can show that unions were attacked and weakened because of other like it's not always been the case that unions have been aligned with corporations. I mean, if Jimmy Hoffa, very corrupt Irish, you watched The Irishman, right?
No.
Oh, Jimmy Hoffa, the guy, Al Pacino plays and all that. I mean, he was a union head and probably, was killed because of that to an extent. I mean, he was corrupt. There was a lot of times he was doing corrupt stuff, but at the same time, he was doing a lot of things for workers and all that. So it's very complex.
Yeah. No, I see. But damn, Marcuse, though, great stuff overall. Great. I mean, if you ask me, though, in general, it gets you to think. And depending on how you approach it, you can get more or less out of it, I think.
Yeah.
Do you have any other quotes?
I have. Yeah, I have two more just about the way he thought society is going. So after he talks about the fact that, there is a possibility of his assumptions that communism continues and capitalism is increasingly able to provide services to the people and all that. Then he goes on to say there are centrifugal tendencies from within and from without. One of them is the inherent in technical progress itself, namely automation. I suggested that expanding automation is more than quantitative growth of mechanization. That is a change in the character of basic productive forces. So ... as large-scale industry advances, the creation of real wealth depends less on the labor time and the quality of labor expended on the power of instrumentalities set in motion during the labor time. These instrumentalities and their powerful effectiveness are in no proportion to the immediate labor time which their production requires. Their effectiveness rather depend on the attained level of science and technological progress. In other words, on the application of this science to production. Human labor then no longer appears as enclosed in the process of production. Man rather than relates himself to the process of production as a supervisor and regulator. He stands outside of the process of production instead of being the principal agent in the process of production in this transformation. So I think he talks a lot about alienation, but I think this is alienation. That is alienation. It's just when you have enough time due to availability within society or environment or whatever, you have enough time to separate yourself from production and look at it as a holistic thing. And he seems to think there's a unique thing about our time, and I just don't agree with that. I would say that this technical progress just has allowed this alienation to become far more widespread than it used to be.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think I agree with that. I mean, I didn't have the quote under my eyes again, so it was a bit, but I think I agree with what you're saying there. And also, do you have anything to say about automation and what he thinks? I mean, he's actually quite positive about automation, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because he thinks automation can free us from working. Was that part of the quote?
That wasn't part of the quote, okay. But let me read. This is. It seems that automation to the limits of technical possibility is incompatible with a society based on private exploitation of human labor power in the process of production. Almost a century before automation, before reality, Marx envisaged its explosive prospect. So, and then he goes on to say what I read just now, which is an interpretation. So I think that's he has he says is technical limits of technical possibilities incompatible with a society based on private exploitation of human labor power. So I think he's positive in terms of technical automation because it frees us from becoming exploited, right? Because machines are exploited, we are not, right? But at the same time, I don't think he's as much positive on the automation of work process or assembly lines and that type of thing, because that to him is the instrument of rationality. And because he says here, where is it? Look, I suggested that expanding automation is more than quantitative growth of mechanization. That is a change in the character of the basic productive forces. So I think that's when he says the changing character, he refers to both the fact that increasing automation means that we are free, we don't have
Mm-hmm.
to toil as much, but he also means that the process itself is becoming automated, rationalized, whatever. So I think he's got a bit of a I think he's both positive and negative on the thing, I think, from the little I read.
Yeah. No. I think I agree with you there. Man, it's tough stuff to deal with after a while.
Yeah, I mean, listen
Yeah.
to this. Automation indeed appears to be the great catalyst of advanced industrial societies. It is an explosive or non-explosive catalyst in the material base of qualitative change, the technical instrument of the turn from quantity to quality. For the social process of automation expresses the transformation, or rather transubstantiation of labor power, in which the latter, separated from the individual, becomes an independent producing object and thus a subject. Which is, I guess, is saying that automation leads us to be able to even further down, break down the productive process and, like make some parts of it more mechanical, while at the same time free the labor from it, so it's a sort of a two-way process. It's not just good or bad, I guess. I think, by the way, I'm not quite sure I understand all of the vocabulary he uses, so full disclosure, please.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add there, really.
Yeah, but I must say, interesting read nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely. Like a lot of parts of it. I mean, I won't repeat myself. I said, like, a lot of thing about the current way when he describes the current situations and current people. A lot of it, I think, has some really like interesting validity. And perhaps it's not a coincidence that I think Joel Whitebook, who we interviewed, really got into Frankfurt School while he was doing his master's or bachelor after being introduced to Marcuse. Same. I believe Martin J. Did he say the same? And me. And I think just some of the stuff that he says really resonates really well. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just coming up with some theory here, but they really resonate with some stages of thinking of people that can perhaps shift that happens in university to some people. And like Marcuse goes really well at that in that way, and like really blends well with that way of thinking.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I agree with that. I must say, if he had used could be interpreted a lot of times instead of is, I would, or could be applied to a segment of people, I would have felt much more comfortable reading it. And I must say, with Marcuse, more than even Adorno and Horkheimer, I felt this sort of this negativity that I like. I feel like Adorno, for example, because Adorno is considered to be the one who's a bit more, the suffering genius and all that. But I feel like, no, Marcuse is the one that is more. Adorno is, in his theory, is almost like I cannot understand and all that. But when it comes to looking at the stuff, whether you agree or disagree, his tone is very scientific.
I see.
With Marcuse, I feel a far more judgmental tone, like, listen to this. True, the rationality of pure science is value-free and does not stipulate any practical ends. It is neutral to any extraneous values that may be imposed upon it. But this neutrality is a positive character. Scientific rationality makes for a specific societal organization precisely because it projects mere form or mere matter, which can be bent or to practically, I think it's any ends and ends. Formalization and functionalization are prior to an application. So, some of it feels more like he wants to talk about morality, I feel like, rather than what is. Like, again, it's about what ought to be, not what is. Like, you see here, he's pointing out that, okay, science is science, but you need a framework of like metaphysics or value system or something to frame that science, so you get to certain ends. And okay, fair enough. But let's talk about that rather than,
Yeah.
this.
No, I see what you mean. No, I think I agree with that criticism as well. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for watching. Please make sure to leave your comments, questions, criticisms, everything else down below. We'll make sure to get to them. If not, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in episode 4. Thank you.